The Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told this parable. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country. And there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent them to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and I will go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come back. Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has gotten him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat, so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours comes back, who devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.'" The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
You may be seated. Here we are, hearing another parable this week. This time, the parable is well known, very well known, in fact. Most of us, if not all of us, have heard this parable of the prodigal son. Some of us maybe have even forgotten that it's a parable because of its popularity. Sometimes this story is so well known that we glamorize it and think that the word prodigal means special or important. The word prodigal actually means wastefully extravagant. The younger son was wasteful to the point of extravagance with the inheritance given to him from his father. He used the money he had carelessly to party and have all the nicest things, and soon he ran out of money, so that he didn't even have food to eat. He was in need, so much so that he started working on a pig farm and was willing to eat the pig's food. One of the best sermons I've ever heard preached on this parable was by my internship pastor and preaching professor, Reverend Beth Donaldson, 6 years ago. She has a doctorate in preaching and is a very gifted preacher. And I still remember learning something new because of that sermon. She had made a small sign that said "Gasp" on it, and she held it up throughout her sermon each time something was shocking and worthy of a gasp. The new thing that I learned during that sermon has stuck stuck with me all these years later, and it was in regards to the historical context, which for us is easily overlooked. The younger son worked with pigs. Doesn't sound shocking. Today in our world, if you work with pigs, you're probably a farmer or a farmhand. You're not considered less than or unclean. However, in those times, to touch a pig made you unclean. Religiously, it wasn't acceptable. It was gasp worthy. If you then touched someone else who was unclean from touching a pig, you were then unclean too. This is a historical piece of context that we just gloss over because this isn't the case today. However, for the father to wrap his arms around his son and kiss him is gasp worthy. Not only did he extravagantly waste the money given to him, but he also participated in unclean practices. The Pharisees and scribes listening to Jesus tell this parable would have known the historical context and what it meant for someone to touch a pig and be unclean. For the wealthy father who had enough means to give an early inheritance to his sons and still maintain his home, which included paid enslaved laborers, he was likely a well-known man in the community with significant power. Yet, despite his power and wealth, he showed his son grace, mercy, and love, just like God does for us. As Luther taught, grace is given to us by God without us doing anything to earn it. Oftentimes, when words are so familiar to us, I like to look up the definition to clearly analyze and understand its meaning. So we know grace. Mercy is defined as forgiveness or compassion shown when it is within one's power to punish or harm. The father definitely would have had the power to punish his son. He could have chosen to not even welcome him back or to make him an enslaved laborer on the farm instead. But rather than doing those things, he throws a party, dresses his son in a robe, a ring, and slippers. He showed his son mercy in a way that most of us can't imagine. I think that although we probably want to be like the father, showing mercy, we more often behave like the older son, unable to fathom why someone who behaved so poorly and squandered everything deserves to be recognized at all, let alone forgiven and welcomed home. The good news is that God shows us mercy and gives us grace even when we feel like we don't deserve it. And I am so glad that God is like the Father and not like the older son. This is the miracle of God. This is where God's divinity shines beyond our imagination. It's our human nature to judge, to make decisions of someone's worthiness based on action or behavior. But we need to continuously be reminded that this isn't how God thinks or behaves. God doesn't measure our worthiness throughout our lifetime. God created us worthy already. This is grace. The hard part here is believing that we are worthy and showing ourselves and others mercy when we fall short. As Christians, we are called to practice and model the love, grace, and mercy God shows to others. But as we all know, Christians are sometimes the worst at doing this. We make up rules and decide who God loves and who God doesn't love. We decide that we are the protectors of God's kingdom, acting as if we decide who's in and who's out. The thing is, everyone is in. I know, it's gasp worthy. The poor person sitting on a park bench begging for food, they are already in. Gasp. The person whose politics don't align with ours, they are already in. Double gasp. The Facebook troll who has to comment on everything just to stir the pot, they're already into. And the people of all different faiths are none at all. Yep, you guessed it, they're already in. The person sitting in your skin beating themselves up for the mistakes they've made, they are in. Gasp, gasp, gasp. This is why God is the one who shows mercy and grace, not us. Don't think you're off the hook, though. We get to try, and we are asked to try to continue practicing showing grace and mercy to others and ourselves. But we aren't going to do it perfectly. Gasp again if you're a perfectionist like me. The good news is that God's grace and mercy and love is bigger than we could ever ask or imagine. Throughout our lives, we will do things that are unimaginable if we haven't already. I know, gasp. We might even feel like we don't deserve to be forgiven for previous actions in life. But the truth is, we already are. Mercy is freely given to us by God. God is looking down the road for us to return, despite how horrible we have or we think we've behaved. We are loved by God no matter our history. We can return to God and we will be welcomed with the loving arms of a parent who has been looking for us to return. And instead of being met with shame or ridicule, we will receive all the mercy God has to offer. But the thing is, so will our neighbors.